We're counting down 13 of Montana's most elusive ghost towns, sites once built on silver, gold, and coal, but now so remote, dismantled, or hidden by wilderness and private claims that they barely register on any modern map. From weathered halls left standing on wind-scoured ridges to near-erased mining camps buried in pasture and snow, each stop reveals a different chapter of boom, bust, and abandonment. Some linger as tended clusters of log cabins. Others exist only as faint stone outlines, lost railbeds, or stories half-remembered in the empty hills. This list traces a progression from the quietly preserved to the almost unfathomably absent, documenting how fortunes measured in millions vanished, leaving only silence and the slow work of winter, elevation, and time. Let's begin our journey with number 13. In the 13th place, Elkhorn sits quietly at the end of a long gravel spur in the Elkhorn Mountains of Jefferson County, Montana. Founded in the early 1870s on the promise of rich silver veins, the town grew quickly, swelling to nearly 2,500 residents as profits poured in from the mines. At its height, Elkhorn boasted grand social halls and a lively main street. The silver market collapse of the 1890s struck hard. Within a single year, the population plummeted, and the once thriving camp emptied as ore bodies thinned and foreclosure notices arrived. Today, Fraternity Hall and Gillian Hall remain, weathered wooden monuments preserved in a partial state park, while most of the site lies silent and untended. The 20-mile gravel road west from Boulder is often blocked by snow in winter, leaving Elkhorn isolated for months at a time. Its survival is a quiet anomaly, a ghost town not erased, but left intact on the edge of the wild, marking the starting point in Montana's long cycle of boom and abandonment. In the 12th place, Garnet clings to a high ridge in the Garnet Range, its cluster of log cabins and weathered storefronts perched above a winding, dusty road. Founded in 1895 after gold was discovered in the nearby gulches, Garnet swelled to nearly 1,000 people at its peak, enough to support 13 saloons, a bustling hotel, and a schoolhouse echoing with children's voices. But the veins ran thin within 2 decades, and by 1912 a string of stovepipe fires and exhausted ore forced families to abandon their homes. Today, roughly 30 cabins, a hotel shell, and the faint outline of a once lively main street survive under the careful stewardship of the Bureau of Land Management. The 12-mile Garnet Range Road, open only from late spring through autumn, closes each winter as snow drifts pile high, cutting off access to all but the most determined. Interpretive signs and BLM maintenance preserve Garnet's story, but the steep, rutted approach and seasonal closures keep it hidden, a quiet reminder of how quickly fortune and community can vanish into silence. In the 11th place, Bannack rises from the quiet valley of Grasshopper Creek. Its weathered wooden buildings line a sagebrush slope at 5,300 feet. Gold was discovered here in 1862, igniting Montana's first true rush and drawing thousands across the frontier. By 1864, Bannack became the territorial capital, and its population swelled past 3,000 as fortunes were hammered out of placer bars and sluice boxes. As the 1870s wore on, the easy gold faded and government offices moved away, leaving behind empty streets and abandoned dreams. Today, Bannack State Park preserves more than 60 original structures, including hotels, a schoolhouse, and the old gallows. They stand silent through the seasons. The last 3 miles of the approach are unpaved and unsigned, and winter often closes the route entirely. Even with its name prominent on modern maps, Bannack's sense of isolation endures, a testament to the fleeting wealth that once made it the heart of Montana's early ambitions. In the 10th place, Coolidge lies high in the Pioneer Mountains, where the wind sweeps through broken timbers and silence reigns for much of the year. Founded in the early 19-teens, this company camp was built around a steam-powered mill designed to process silver and lead ore at nearly 8,000 feet, an altitude that pushed the limits of early 20th century engineering. At its height, about 500 people called Coolidge home, braving brutal winters and the constant threat of avalanches that could halt mining for months at a time. The mill's machinery hummed through short summers, but snowslides and isolation forced repeated closures, and the economic crash of the 1930s brought a final, irreversible end. Today, a lone schoolhouse leans beside a cold creek, its roof sagging under decades of snow, while the mill's skeletal remains scatter across the alpine meadow. Reaching Coolidge demands a 22-mile drive on a rough dirt track that twists above the tree line, with no cell signal and no sign of modern life. Just the remnants of a town that surrendered to altitude and weather, hidden far from the reach of most maps. Number 9. Comet sits behind a locked ranch gate, its scattered wooden storefronts and leaning cabins melting into the hillside just 10 miles from Boulder. Born in the 1880s silver boom, Comet was never large. At its height, about 300 people lived in a rough cluster of houses, boarding halls, and saloons, their fortunes tied to the price of ore pulled from the steep shafts above town. When silver collapsed in 1893, production plummeted overnight and the population dwindled. Unlike sites protected as parks, Comet's land was gradually absorbed into private ranch holdings, its boundaries marked by faded no trespassing signs and barbed wire. Today, weathered timbers and rusted machinery remain, but access is tightly restricted. Right-of-way ends at the edge of the pasture, and the town's name barely registers on modern maps. With each passing winter, the last traces of Comet slip further from view. A reminder that ownership can be as effective a barrier to memory as distance or snow. 8th place belongs to Coloma, a name nearly lost to the mossy shadows of the Garnet Range. Placer gold drew fortune hunters here in 1866, but the rush faded almost as quickly as it began. Fewer than 200 people ever called Coloma home, and within 4 years the surface gold had been panned clean. Today, the forest is reclaiming everything. Foundation outlines, softened by decades of rain and lichen, are barely visible beneath the undergrowth. The most enduring trace is a hillside cemetery, simple headstones, some marked only by weathered boards, scattered among the pines. Trails leading in are faint and unmarked, and the settlement itself does not appear on consumer maps. Where once there was the noise of sluice boxes and hurried voices, now only the wind moves through the trees. Coloma stands as a reminder that some towns fade not with violence or disaster, but with the quiet, steady return of the land to itself. Number 7. Marysville lingers in the shadow of the Drumlin mine, just 15 miles northwest of Helena. Founded in 1880 after Thomas Cruise struck gold, the town swelled to nearly 1,500 people, its fortunes tethered to the deep quartz veins beneath the hills. Payroll sheets from 1905, preserved in the Montana Historical Society, tell of miners waiting for wages that never arrived, while family diaries describe the quiet heartbreak as payday stopped and neighbors drifted away. At its peak, Marysville's Main Street buzzed with a brick hotel and busy shops, and the promise of enduring prosperity. Drumlin alone yielded more than $10 million in gold, a sum that would top $300 million today. But by the autumn of 1905, the mine's riches were spent, and the exodus began. Today, the roofless hotel stands as a hollow shell. A few modern cabins are scattered among the ruins. There are no interpretive signs, and the line between living town and ghost is blurred, confusing even the most determined traveler. On Google Maps, Marysville appears as a faint cluster, its past almost lost amid the silence. Yet the voices of its miners remain, tucked away in brittle ledgers and fading letters. Granite perches atop the steep slopes of the Flint Creek Range, where thin air and silence linger at 7,200 feet. Chartered in 1872 during Montana's silver frenzy, Granite quickly became one of the richest camps in the state. At its height, nearly 1,200 people crowded the mountainside, building not just cabins, but newspapers, telegraph lines, and a sense of permanence that would prove illusory. The town's fortunes were tied entirely to the price of silver, and in 1893 a blizzard of foreclosure notices swept through Granite County. Within weeks, 90% of residents vanished, forced out as the mines collapsed under the weight of the national economic crash. Today, only the stone superintendent's house and the old jail remain upright among the scattered foundations, battered by wind and snow. The road up from Phillipsburg climbs sharply and is closed by snow gates each October, leaving Granite cut off for much of the year. Its rapid rise and even sharper fall are still etched in the empty streets and steep switchbacks, a place where prosperity was measured in ounces of silver and lost in a single season. Number 5. Castletown stands battered on the windswept slopes of the Castle Mountains in Mayher County, its story marked by a cycle of hope, destruction, and abandonment. Founded in 1869, Castletown grew quickly as silver and gold drew nearly 2,000 residents to its rugged streets. For a brief moment, the settlement buzzed with the activity of miners, merchants, and families. Cabins dotted the hillside, and the promise of prosperity seemed within reach, but disaster struck not once, but twice. In 1884, a sweeping fire tore through the heart of the town, erasing entire blocks in a single night. 7 years later, flames returned, leaving only blackened foundations and shattered dreams. Even as residents rebuilt, another blow arrived in 1896, when railroad surveyors chose a different valley for their tracks. Investors withdrew, and the market for Castle's ore collapsed almost overnight. By the turn of the century, the population had dwindled to a handful. Today, only scattered cabin shells, weathered fence posts, and a hillside cemetery remain, all accessible by a 40-mile stretch of gravel road that winds through high country and snowdrifts. Castletown's compounded misfortunes, serial fires, and the fateful railroad bypass have left it nearly erased from both memory and map, a place where ambition was consumed by flame and isolation. Number 4. Aldridge lies scattered across the slopes near Electric Peak in Park County, where the Yellowstone River carves a cold corridor through the Absaroka foothills. The town took shape around 1900, built on a seam of coal that promised steady work and warmth for the fast-growing railroads and smelters of the early 20th century. Nearly 400 miners and their families settled in rows of company houses, drawn by the rhythm of the mine hoist and the distant whistle of the Northern Pacific. But beneath the surface, methane gas collected in the tunnels, and in 1904, a sudden explosion tore through the main shaft, killing 5 men in an instant. The blast set off a wave of grief and anger as survivors demanded safer conditions, and the United Mine Workers called a strike that shut the camp for weeks. Production never truly recovered. Through the 1920s, labor unrest and falling coal prices hollowed out the payroll, and by 1943, the last shaft closed for good. Today, only fragments remain: the concrete bases of the tipple, a few rusted rail beds threading through sagebrush, and the faint grid of a town erased by time and divided by patchwork private land. Aldridge's story lingers in Union archives and casualty rolls, but on the ground the silence is almost total. A place where the cost of coal was measured not just in dollars, but in lives. and where the scars of disaster and division have left it nearly invisible on any modern map. Independence sits alone at the edge of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, more than 9,000 feet above sea level, where the wind scours the ridgelines and winter snow buries the last traces of habitation for much of the year. Gold was first staked here in 1879, and for a brief span, about 350 people braved the thin air and relentless cold, building cabins and staking their hopes on the narrow veins that threaded through the alpine rock. Every supply, flour, tools, even mail, had to be hauled up by mule train or on the backs of men, and by the late 1880s, the cost of freight alone outstripped the value of the gold coming out of the ground. As the 1890s wore on, the camp's population dwindled, driven out by the long snowbound months and the simple math of diminishing returns. Today, the only access is by foot or horseback, following faint trails across fields of talus and wind-stunted pine. The remains are sparse, a few collapsed cabins, their roofs flattened by decades of snow, and the faint outlines of old mining trenches now softened by lichen and alpine grass. In the 1970s, federal wilderness rules erased roadside signage, and trail permits now mark the boundary between public memory and the silent, lawless wild. Independence is absent from most digital maps, its name surviving only in survey records and the rare USGS label. Here, the wilderness has reclaimed nearly everything, and the silence is broken only by the sigh of wind over the high pass, an isolation more complete than any distance could measure. Hecla stands on a narrow ridge deep in the Pioneer Mountains, where the wind cuts across loose talus at nearly 8,500 feet. Silver claims were first filed here in 1877, and for a brief window, the promise of wealth drew close to 800 people up the winding haul roads. The camp clung to the ridgeline, with cabins and boarding houses perched above steep drop-offs, and the sound of ore carts echoing across the slopes. But the veins ran thin almost as quickly as they were discovered. Within a decade, the rush faded, and the population scattered, leaving behind only the bones of a town, timbers, adits, and a tilting schoolhouse that still clings to the hillside, its roof sagging under the weight of snow and years. Today, Hecla is almost a rumor, obscured not just by its altitude and the treacherous gravel approach, 25 miles from Wise River, but by the legal fog that has settled over its remains. Modern claim gates block the old wagon routes, and the land is divided by overlapping private interests, making public access all but impossible. Even the maps have conspired in its vanishing. After 1910, both Google and USGS erased the label, citing low traffic and the complications of claim ownership. What little survives is held in a kind of suspended decay, a schoolhouse leaning toward collapse, adits yawning above the scree, and the memory of a settlement nearly erased by both nature and law. Without precise coordinates or local knowledge, Hecla slips past the casual traveler, marking the final threshold before total erasure. And finally, in first place, Storrs occupies a space not just beyond the reach of most roads, but almost beyond memory itself. Founded in 1892 as a coal camp by the Anaconda Copper Mining Company, Storrs was never large. At its height, fewer than 150 people lived here, their lives measured by the shifts of the mine and the steam trains that hauled fuel toward distant smelters. The town's existence was always tied to corporate need: a cluster of company houses, a small store, and a rail spur threading out across the prairie. As coal demand waned after World War II, the company made a decision that would set Storrs apart from every other ghost town in Montana. In 1953, with the last seams exhausted and the market gone, Anaconda ordered the entire camp dismantled. Crews leveled the houses, buried the streets beneath regraded pasture, and erased the grid of the town from the land. Residents who had spent decades in Storrs watched as their homes vanished, their voices preserved only in a handful of oral histories and faded photographs. Today, nothing stands above ground. No weathered boards, no cemetery, no sign to mark the place. Only faint rail embankments, visible in the right slant of evening light, betray the site of a community that once supplied the engines of Montana's copper empire. On Google Maps, the name Storrs does not appear. Even the coordinates yield only an empty field. In the quiet of the prairie, the endpoint of Montana's ghost town story is not decay, but deliberate erasure. A town unmade by design, its memory nearly lost to time. Across all 13 forgotten towns, one truth endures. Fortunes measured in millions, entire communities, and even their names can vanish into wind-scoured valleys and silent timber. Montana's ghost towns remind us that landscapes always outlast the ambitions built upon them. The echoing ruins and erased map pins are not just history. They are a quiet lesson in impermanence. If you felt the silence here, share your thoughts below.